Look at me. Look at me, teacher.
No. No.
Look at me, teacher. Look at me.
No! Get out! I revoke my invitation!
You'll sleep like the dead, teacher.
Stephen King is one of my favorite horror writers. I love his books and the movies based on his books. And I'll bet you a pint of blood that you can't guess my favorite. His vampire story, Salem's Lot. Its monster, Mr. Barlow, is one of the most famous and frightening vampires in television history. You'll enjoy Mr. Barlow, and he'll enjoy you. Before he became a full-time writer, Stephen King was a high school English teacher, and while he was teaching the classic horror novel Dracula, he had the idea, what if Dracula went to modern-day New York City? But his wife Tabitha suggested, no, instead of a big city, have him go to a small town, where everybody knows everybody, and gossip and dirty little secrets run rampant. Stephen King began writing under the title Second Coming, but Tabitha thought that sounded like a sex manual, so he changed it to Jerusalem's Lot. But then Doubleday, the publisher, thought that sounded too religious, so he finally settled on Salem's Lot. The book was a bestseller, and Warner Brothers bought the film rights. But none of the writers were able to successfully condense King's 400-page novel into a 120-page screenplay, which is the normal length. However, Richard Kobritz, who was the executive vice president of television production at Warner's, was a horror fan. And he had just had a big hit with the horror TV movie Somebody's Watching Me. And he had the idea that Salem's Lot should be a 2-night miniseries, because then your screenplay could be 190 pages and you could be more faithful to the novel. Kobritz brought on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre's Tobe Hooper to direct, and cast this wonderful ensemble of familiar faces, including Starsky and Hutch's David Soul to play Ben Mears, the Maltese Falcons' Elijah Cook Jr. to play the town drunk Weasel Phillips, and aging movie star James Mason to play Richard Straker. Filming took place in Ferndale, California, which is known for its Victorian-style architecture, and most of what you see are real homes and stores, except for the sinister Marstead House. This had to be something special. Richard Kobritz and Tobe Hooper wanted it to be so impressive that it could be seen from every part of town. The exterior was built over an old farmhouse. Sections of the building were flown in by helicopter, and construction crews and local laborers worked 7 days a week to get it ready in time. And indeed, it is the evil heart of Salem's Lot. The writer Ben Mears returns to his old hometown Salem's Lot to write about the Marston House, which is the haunted house that terrified him as a kid. It's been vacant for over 20 years, but just recently, newcomers in town, Mr. Richard Straker and Mr. Kurt Barlow, have rented the house and are opening an antique shop in town. No one has seen Mr. Barlow. People in town think it's because he hasn't arrived yet, but it's really because he's a vampire, and with the help of his servant Mr. Straker, has begun attacking people in Salem's Lot and creating more vampires. Ben has reconnected with his old teacher Jason Burke, and has fallen in love with Susan Norton, the daughter of Dr. Norton. Ben believes the recent deaths in town have some connection to the Marston house, and when a sickly Mike Ryerson stays the night and dies at Jason Burke's house, Ben and Jason realize that it's a vampire. To save Susan and destroy the vampires, Ben, along with Dr. Norton and Mark Petrie, go into the Marston house. Salem's Lot is about a vampire coming to a small town. And what I love about it is, they make you feel like you know what it's like to live in Salem's Lot. And the horror comes when this familiar setting goes awry. While they're setting up the story, you learn everything about this small town. In Salem's Lot, everybody knows everybody. And you get to know everybody too, and what their function is in town. There's everybody's favorite English teacher, Jason Burke. Mike Ryerson, who works in the cemetery. And the local floozy, Boom Boom Bonnie. You don't get the name Boom Boom for nothing. You also learn the important places, like the local haunted house, the Marston House, Eva Miller's boarding house, and Barlow and Straker's antique shop. When Mark Petrie is rehearsing the school pageant, you learn the history of the town. You learn what and who the people are gossiping about, what kids play together, and you even learn the local drink, Canadian on the Rocks. Some people complain that these scenes, like the affair between Cully's wife, Boom Boom Bonnie, and the real estate agent Larry Crockett, are unnecessary, but you're getting the normal Salem's Lot experience, so that you can understand the town's disintegration later on. I like your shorts, Larry. You must too keep them on like that. Where'd you get them? Boston? They sure look good on you. Look, I know how this must look to you, but let me explain what happened. Grab the barrel, Larry. Good boy. Now hold it up in front of your face. Hold it, Larry. Steady, Larry. Don't move. Don't move. See how much self-control you can have? It's terrific. Now close your eyes, Larry. Close them. Then Mr. Barlow comes to town, and he starts biting people. Then they become vampires, and they start biting people, and it multiplies and multiplies. I bet if you tell that to your math teacher, he'll start showing vampire movies. But remember, in Salem's Lot, everybody knows everybody, so it's people you know and care about suddenly becoming vampires. Like your little brother, your girlfriend, or your former student. When you see them, you still see that person that you have a connection with, and you want to invite them in. But then they're going to kill you. And that's what makes it so scary. One of the most famous and frightening scenes is when Lil Ralphie Glick becomes a vampire and is floating outside of his big brother Danny's window. It's like an evil homage to Peter Pan. You still see some of that innocent little kid, so you can see why Danny lets his little brother in. But then there are these eerie features added so that you know he's evil. They do about 3 variations of it, and instead of using wires, they actually put him in a body cast that was attached to a boom crane, and they filmed it in reverse, so that the mist would go in the opposite direction that it would normally go. So even subconsciously, it has a supernatural and haunting look. Slowly but surely, people get bitten and become vampires. Others leave town. Places like the shortcut through the woods is no longer safe. The cemetery that you worked at for years is no longer safe. And you can't even go to the police because the constable has left town and the deputy is becoming a vampire. So this quiet little New England town that it feels like we lived in suddenly has no one we could turn to and no place safe to go. And the main vampire behind it is Mr. Barlow. And yes, I made a New England pun. In the book, Kurt Barlow is a normal-looking, well-spoken, and dapper vampire in the Bela Lugosi tradition. But in 1979, when they were making Salem's Lot, Universal released a Dracula remake, the very attractive Count Dracula. So Richard Kobritz didn't want to do the seducer vampire. He wanted the essence of evil. So they went back even further than Bela Lugosi and used Count Orlok from the silent film Nosferatu as their inspiration. They cast Reggie Nalder, and I know this isn't a nice thing to say, but he had a very uniquely shaped, cadaverous face. When you apply this great scary makeup, you get this look that's nightmarish and unhuman, but seems real because some of it is. He doesn't speak, he only snarls. And even his movement has this unhuman quality. Sometimes he'll move supernaturally fast. His gesturing is odd. And when he appears in the Petrie home, he rises up from his cloak, like the Wicked Witch's death scene but done in reverse.
The master wants you. Throw away your cross, face the master, your faith against his faith. Could you do that? Is your faith strong enough? Then do it.
I'm a priest.
Priest. Throw away your cross, face the master, faith against faith.
Like Frankenstein's monster in The Creature from the Black Lagoon, Reggie Nelder is not listed in the credits, giving him an even more mysterious air. In the movie, they hold back on showing him to build suspense, and even after he's revealed, you only see him for a little bit here and a little bit there, but each moment is horrifying. However, the reason they're able to use this approach is because when Mr. Barlow is off-screen, you still feel his evil presence through his servant, Mr. Straker, magnificently played by James Mason.
Mr. Straker is the front man. He runs the antique store, interacts with the public, and prepares everything for Mr. Barlow. And even though he's mortal, he actually has that Bela Lugosi style of evil sophistication. So you actually get the best of both worlds. He's always well dressed in a black suit, always polite, but there's this eeriness behind it. And this dark humor, because almost everything he says has a condescending double meaning.
Oh, you're the writer. On vacation or vocation?
I am writing about the Marston house.
Ah, and you like to visit. Well, why not? Mr. Barlow is on a buying trip, but the moment he arrives, you'll enjoy Mr. Barlow, and he'll enjoy you. They lucked out with James Mason. He had been a huge star with this magnificent voice. He was Captain Nemo in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Norman Maine in A Star Is Born, and Philip Van Damme in North by Northwest. And I think Richard Straker is up there with his greatest roles, and he embraced it. In an interview, he talked about how a TV miniseries can do so much more and be truer to the vampire legends than a feature film could. And everyone involved in Salem's Lot had great memories of working with him. Julie Cobb said he was the most erudite, cultured, sophisticated, handsome, elegant, and graceful man, and a wonderful actor. And David Soul said that it helped his acting, because he was thinking, oh my Christ, I'm working with James Mason.
Sometimes he seems a little nervous, which tells you how ferocious Mr. Barlow can be. But he also seems to genuinely enjoy being Mr. Barlow's servant. And I think that's the creepiest thing about James Mason's performance. He's happy and proud to bring him the dead body of Ralphie Glick. Aside from the spooks, I think the grooviest character is Lance Kerwin as Mark Petrie, because he's a horror fan. Or as the people in the in-crowd call him, a monster kid. Just like I was when I was a kid and first saw Salem's Lot. So I totally identified with Mark Petrie.
He loves monsters, magic, and his room is almost as cool as mine, with posters, figures, and a cemetery model kit.
His parents and even his friends think it's weird. But when Danny Glick is floating outside of Mark's window, Mark realizes, quicker than any of the adults have, that it's a vampire. So he takes the cross from his cemetery model kit, which only a monster kid would have, and repels Danny away.
Open the window. Open the window, Mark. It's okay, I'm your friend. He commands it.
Go away. Go away! No! So the knowledge that he acquired from being a horror fan is what saves his life. Because Mr. Barlow kills his parents, he ends up joining Ben Mears in the fight against vampires, almost like Robin from Batman. And I think that would be a secret dream for many monster kids.
The rest of the cast is great too. I especially like how David Soul is scared and vulnerable while still exuding this confidence. And each one of them brings this natural quality to their performance, and they all seem like they're from the same Salem's Lot community. However, at the center of this community is its monument to evil, the Marston House.
I went up there once on a dare. You know how kids are. I sneaked around into the house. I saw ghosts, everything, every sound, every shadow. I'm not really sure what I saw. I think I saw U.B. Marston hanging by his neck. His face green, his eyes puffed shut, his hands livid, his ghastly. Then he opened his eyes and looked at me. Then I took off. I ran. I've never forgotten that. Jason, there was something. A feeling. Do you believe a thing could be inherently evil? A house. The Marston House, for instance. Can it be evil in its stone foundation and its wooden beams, and the glass of its window and the plaster of its ceilings? Evil. The man who built that house killed his wife and servant, and then hanged himself in his bedroom closet. U.B. Marston's sister and wife both died mysteriously, rumors of poison never proved. Then the young boys in the area started to disappear. People suspected U.B. Marston, but it was never proved. Now we have a Mr. Straker and a Mr. Barlow, whom no one has ever seen. I believe an evil house attracts evil men. But why did it attract me?
We first see the Marston house in the opening credits, and it is a classic spooky-looking haunted house. They give it an intriguing backstory that goes even more in depth in the book, and you can see why Ben Mears and Mark Petrie are fascinated by it. Ben went inside as a child and has been scared ever since. They show it and talk about it throughout the film, and it gives the whole town an eerie atmosphere. It's also perfect for a vampire. Dracula had a scary castle. Mr. Barlow has the Marston house. We see the outside and basement, but we don't really go inside until the end. We've waited the whole movie for it, and it lives up to our imagination. It is so creepy inside. It's rotting, and it has taxidermied animals on the wall, an old chandelier, and in the basement, there's Mr. Barlow's coffin and a whole group of vampires.
In the book, the climax actually takes place in the basement of Eva Miller's boarding house, but this was a brilliant change, because it allows the whole movie to build up to this scary and satisfying climax. Plus, it completes the character arc for Ben Mears, because he has to overcome his old childhood fear in order to go in the house and try to save Susan. And he does hesitate for a moment.
CBS aired the first 2 hours of Salem's Lot on Saturday, November 17th, 1979. And the second 2 hours were shown the following Saturday. It got 3 Emmy nominations for makeup, music, and graphic design, and has become a cult classic. Salem's Lot was also released overseas as a theatrically released movie. They cut it down to 112 minutes, but some of the violent scenes actually included extra footage that Tobe Hooper had shot just for the foreign release. This edited version is usually called Salem's Lot the Movie. Salem's Lot started the long tradition of Stephen King TV miniseries. There has also been a sequel, a 2004 remake, and a new theatrically released remake on the way.
I think Salem's Lot is one of the best vampire movies ever made. Yes, they had to deal with TV censorship and the TV budget, but some of the scenes, like Ralphie Glick attacking his brother, stick with you forever. So I give it 4 pairs of red underwear out of 4. Thank you for watching Dusty Old Movies, and enjoy a Canadian on the Rocks. Or a Bloody Mary.